Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be discussing 10 common myths slash misconceptions about horses. Now, some of these, I honestly was shocked that people thought these were actual facts when they are in fact myths, and vice versa. Some of these I thought were fact, and I'm finding out may in fact not be true. And I think as well, a lot of us, including myself, have seen a lot of these points being argued between equestrians on the internet. So on that note, everyone just please be as polite as possible to each other in the comments, and just know that none of this is my opinion. I did my very best to only find information that had been written by either experts in their field, so like nutritionists and things like that, by veterinarians, equine veterinarians specifically, or where there was actual research done. So I understand this is the horse world. Everyone has a lot of opinions, everyone does things differently, and that is completely fine. But please just take note before you come for me in the comments that, again, not my opinion. I'm just the messenger, guys. But of course, if you guys have any other information on any of these points, then feel free to comment it down below, because I'm always interested to hear people's opinions. But also, if there are any myths that you think that I haven't covered today, then of course also put them down below, because I do enjoy reading these quite a bit. I did try to steer away from anything that was too medical. There is honestly a lot of myths when it comes to colic, for example, but I kind of just tried to leave that one alone because I kind of feel a little bit out of place giving anyone advice about a serious medical condition. Anything serious, you know who you should talk to, your vet. Alright, with that out of the way, it is time to get started, so let's jump into the video. Myth number 1, horses need to be rugged at all times. Alternatively, I feel cold, therefore my horse feels cold. Now, this is absolutely not the case, and I know in Australia in particular, over-rugging is a pretty big issue here. Now, we are located in the south of Australia, so it is the coldest area, and it can get cold here, but compared to some other locations around the world, we have a pretty mild climate, to be honest, and I'll often see horses wearing far too thick rugs for the temperature it is that day. Now, to give you guys an idea, I'm going to pop up a bit of a rugging guide on the screen, because it is fine to rug your horses. I also don't like it when people go that other extreme where they're like, oh, horses survived in the wild for thousands of years and they didn't wear rugs. Yeah, of course, but horses are domesticated now. And like, if I just put Fletch out, who's a thin-skinned thoroughbred, into the paddock when it was pouring rain, even with a shelter, he would be shivering cold. So you need to kind of find that balance. So before I pop the rugging guide up on the screen, there's a few other things that you guys need to take into consideration to make sure that you're assessing each horse on kind of an individual basis, as well as taking this guide into account. But number 1, your horse's age. So generally very young or very old horses are going to struggle to stay warm in cooler temperatures. Whether you're going to be clipping your horse or leaving them in their winter coat, whether they're stabled, are they turned out, do they have access to good shelter in their paddock. And obviously breeding is very important as well. Even my horse Fletcher, he's a thoroughbred, versus my other horse Peach, who's a stock horse cross. I find that she is much more resilient to cold weather than he is. And just keep in mind when I do pop this guide up on the screen just now, that all the temperatures are in Celsius. From -10 up to 0, it is saying that you need a 1200 denier rug with about 300 gram polyfill, with either a cotton or even a fleece underneath. Between 0 and 5 degrees, 200 gram polyfill, a medium sort of coverage rug. From 5 degrees to 10 degrees, it's saying a light rug, about 150 gram polyfill, or no fill if it's a sunny day. From 10 degrees to 15 degrees, it's literally saying just a light cotton. Now, I would say most people in Australia would still have their horse rugged in between this bracket of temperatures. Probably the only time that's acceptable is, for example, if it's going to be raining that day. And then you might want to leave them in an extremely light, non-fill, waterproof rug as well, or just pull all the rugs off if you think they can cope with it. And then above 15 degrees, then generally no rug is the best option. Now, of course, if you need to protect your horse from UV or from insects if they get quite irritated, then a mesh rug is a really good option as well. On to myth number 2, and that is that if you hose a horse with cold water, then they could have a heart attack and die. Now, so I honestly really don't know where this myth came from. As to my first point, horses are very tough and very adaptable to temperature change. So I promise, just because they get some cold water on them, they're not going to suddenly have a heart attack. And to be honest, if anything, it's beneficial, especially if you've just done very intense work, if you've just come off cross country and they've come back hot and sweaty. it's good to cool them down as rapidly as possible, and the way you're going to do that is with cold water. I mean, obviously don't go hosing your horse with cold water on a cold day for no reason. That's kind of just common sense, but again, they're just going to get cold. They're not going to have a heart attack still. There was also a ton of research done on this back in 1996 for the Atlanta Olympic Games. Obviously the temperatures there were going to be extremely hot and very, very humid, and they found that the best possible way to cool your horse down after intense work was cold water, scrape it off immediately, cold water again, repeat, and just keep repeating the process. And I honestly just don't think that they would have told Olympians to do something to their horse that would have caused it to potentially have a heart attack. The one other argument I did see was some people saying that hosing your horse off with cold water would also lead to tying up, potentially. Again, though, I don't really see how tying up then leads to heart attack, but you know, I went down that path anyways, and from what I can tell, there really isn't any concrete evidence to show that that is the case. And I've been around eventers and eventing for a very long time, and generally if a horse is tying up, it's usually actually related back to their diet, potentially an electrolyte imbalance, horse not being fit enough for particular, you know, exercises, or going around across country and them not being quite fit enough, and even dehydration, but not you hosing the horse with cold water. So I have to say I did find this one a little bit upsetting that some people did think that this was true, when obviously it is actually very, very beneficial for you to cool your horse down as quickly as possible after intense work. And that's been shown again and again to reduce injury, help their recovery, and just overall it's healthier for your horse. So please do not be put off by this rumor that your horse will somehow keel over just because you're putting some cold water on them. It's really important to keep your horse cool and manage them after intense work. On to myth number 3, and honestly I think that this one is much more prevalent in non-equestrian communities, and that is that horse riding is not exercise, or horse riding is not a sport. Definition of a sport, please. An activity involving physical exertion and skill which an individual or team, doesn't specify human only team, human horse team, competes against another or others for entertainment. Now you cannot tell me that horse riding is not a sport. But also counter to that, it is also an exercise. Can I just tell you that actual scientific research has concluded that riding your horse for 45 minutes, walk, trot and canter, burns 200 calories, which is equivalent to running upstairs for half an hour or riding your bike for half an hour. Now, would you rather ride a bike for half an hour or ride your horse for 45 minutes? I don't really think we even have to answer that question. All the horses out there are going to be really annoyed with me with this one, but it is actually a myth that horses need to all be fed at the same time every day. And I am sure a lot of you will know that stables will always have very strict feeding schedules. So generally there's a set time in the AM and in the PM, and that is when the horses get fed. But it has actually been shown that this is not actually of any benefit to the horses, but where it has come from is us as horse owners needing the convenience of having timed feeds. So it's beneficial to us because it makes our lives a little bit easier knowing what time our horses are going to get fed. Now, a really good point that researchers did make is that ideally you should actually be feeding your horse throughout the entire day. And what they mean by that is you should mimic nature as much as possible. Horses generally in the wild will eat for about 3/4 of the day. Obviously that's pasture. So you want to try and provide your horse with forage, whether it's hay, whether it's grass, whatever it is that you're able to supply them with. And they should be eating that through the entire day. And that is actually much more beneficial for the way that their digestive system is built, rather than dropping them, you know, 2 concentrated feeds at each end of the day. Now, I understand a lot of people still need to feed their horse concentrated feed. I have to. We don't have enough grass to just let our horses survive alone on forage, so I understand. But if you can minimize that as much as possible, then it's actually more beneficial for your horse. Dark hooves are stronger than white hooves. I have heard this my entire life. I honestly thought that this was true, but apparently it may not actually be a thing. A scientist did some research and they basically compressed squares of hoof samples, which is a little bit morbid, but what they found was that there was no difference in the strength of the different coloured hooves. The one thing they did say is that water content seemed to make a difference, so a hoof with higher water content was softer and therefore fell apart more easily, but they didn't relate that back to the colour of horses' feet either. And then the other thing they said is that maybe breeding comes into it. So apparently certain breeds of horses just don't have a good reputation with strong feet, so maybe that's where the rumors kind of come from. The researcher did say that more research needs to be done, so it's not a completely closed case situation. I'm a little shocked because honestly I always thought and had always been told that horses with white feet generally tend to have more issues. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Let me know down below. This next one is very dear to my heart, and that is that all chestnuts are crazy. I am sure most of you have heard the jokes about chestnut Arabian mares being actual psychopaths, but research is now showing that it may actually be a total myth. And thank goodness, because I actually own 2 chestnuts, one of which is a mare. Bit awkward. Now I will say to you guys that the research done was more of a survey, and so there could be some flaws in the way that it was conducted, so probably more research needs to go into this. But what they found from their initial results is that the chestnut horses were actually no more or just as naughty as their bay counterparts. And what I find very interesting is that this survey actually showed that chestnuts seem to be bolder in unfamiliar situations or with unfamiliar objects, and they're more likely to approach that situation or object. Which I have to say, and although anecdotally, Fletch has to be one of the boldest, bravest horses I have ever owned. He is an absolute jumping machine. He's always very confident with weird or unfamiliar situations. For example, when I was trying to do the gender reveal and there was balloons going everywhere, all the other horses in the other paddocks were running away from me and he came straight up. And even when it comes to going out on trail rides, he is always the horse that wants to be out in front and leading the group, and nothing really phases him. So maybe there is something to this idea that chestnuts tend to be bolder. Horses only sleep standing up. Now I feel like if you're like me and you've owned horses for an extended period of time, you would know that this is not true. But it does seem to come up a lot. Now don't get me wrong, horses can sleep while they're standing. I think we've all seen that before. They do have a locking mechanism which allows them to not fall flat on their faces while they're doing that, but they also still need REM sleep. Now that is essentially a very deep sleep, and they can only achieve it when they're lying down. But unlike humans, horses don't really need that much sleep, so they only lie down for REM for maybe 1 to 2 hours every single day, and usually it's taken in like little intervals, so usually at 15 minutes at a time, which is why maybe some people think that horses never lie down. Honestly, that makes me so jealous. I wish that I only had to sleep for 2 hours a day. I feel like I would get so much more done. This next one is a little bit tough, but I think it's really important that people understand that it is not actually a fact, and that is that letting your horse drink too much water after intense exercise can cause them to colic. So there was a lot of different information when it came to this particular myth, and from what I could work out, the idea that you could somehow give your horse colic from letting them drink too much after intense work basically came from the fact that if your horse gets heat stress, it can cause them to colic, i.e. not cooling down quickly enough, or if you feed your horse too much grain too quickly after intense work, that can lead to colic for sure, and it can also lead to founder. So I think that's sort of where the myth developed. People are equating giving your horse water to those situations, but it is very, very important that you let your horse drink plenty of water straight after intense exercise. I'm sure a lot of you have heard this before, and I know I was told this a lot of times when I was younger, and that is that after your horse comes back from intense work, you're supposed to offer them like 4 to 6 gulps of water, and then you walk them for 10 minutes, and then you bring them back to the water and let them get another 4 to 6 gulps. And it's all about managing the intake to make sure it's not too much and doesn't cause them colic. Now what is actually recommended is that you just let your horse have a very decent drink after intense work. If you limit it too much, you're actually risking them becoming dehydrated, and they're not going to be able to cool themselves down as easily. And part of that as well, if you're only letting them have little drinks at intervals, sometimes that can kind of reduce their drive to drink, so they'll end up drinking less overall, and that in turn can affect their recovery rate. So that is not good either. So next time your horse comes back from intense work, make sure you offer them a really decent drink, because it is super important for their recovery. Round bales should never be fed to horses. Now I totally understand this, because most people do think that round bales are for cows, not for horses. And I think part of that is that people often do see round bales as lower quality hay, namely because they're generally not stored the same way that square bales are. Often they're left out in the field, and that can cause bacteria to grow, which can in turn cause diseases such as botulism in horses, which you definitely do not want. But if you can find round bales that have been stored correctly and bought in and kept dry, they're actually very, very economical and perfectly fine to be fed to horses. Very, very quick note, if you are going to be leaving it round bale on your horse's paddock, you do need to make sure that you unwrap the plastic wrapping that comes around it, because horses are very good at trying to eat that and you do not want any of them getting sick. So now I have to say, this next one is one that I've seen argued many a time on the internet, and to be honest, it's probably one of the ones where I'm really not sure. I'm sort of on the fence either way, and that is that horses are able to self-regulate their nutrition. Now, the main argument for this is that horses who eat dirt are doing so because they know they have some sort of imbalance, and they're trying to counteract that. Usually people say they don't have enough salt in their diet, and that is why they've started to eat dirt to try and supplement that. But recent research is starting to show that this might not actually be true. There are two main arguments. Number one is that horses who are already on a complete diet and getting every supplement that they need will still eat dirt. Second to that, horses who are on the same pasture, similar diet, similar workloads, don't all end up eating dirt. So it could be more of an individual preference rather than an actual nutrient deficiency. If you do have a horse that eats dirt, they did suggest that there are two reasons that that happens. Number one being boredom. So they did suggest bringing in a paddock mate or a more energetic paddock mate if they've got one already to keep them interested and distracted. And number two was being in a paddock where there wasn't enough forage. So if you haven't got much grass at the moment, then they did suggest substituting that with some hay to try and distract your horse and get them out of the habit. Thank you guys so much for watching. Of course, if you think there are any myths that I missed in this video, then comment them down below because I do really enjoy reading them. I have some really exciting videos coming up that I know you guys are gonna absolutely love, so I can't wait for you all to see them. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. And if you do want to see more of myself and my 3 horses, then you can follow us on Instagram at hand.equestrian. Oh, Crumpet, you're in the video. You guys see the little ears? This is our little cat, Crumpet. Hello.